interesting with the way the image of the spider is played, because there's two aspects of it, and you see this in what the Queen of the Night says at the end, right? If a lady finds a spider out in the in the garden, she'll let him live, but if she finds him in her chamber, um, and so there's this difference.
That was a terrifying scene, by the way.
Yeah.
Totally amazing.
Brilliantly.
I would say it compares the Galadriel scene whenever she
Oh, I think it's much better, actually. I don't like the way they did that scene in the Jackson films. So I thought this was better.
Oh, get a tip of the hat to Queen of the Night.
Better than Peter Jackson.
Better than Peter.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Derek Fiedler. Joining me today is Richard Rohlin and Gareth Boyd. Today, we're going to be talking about Queen of the Night. Richard Rohlin is a software developer, Germanic philologist. He's co-host of the Amun Sul podcast, which goes over Lord of the Rings lore. He's also co-host of Universal History podcast with Jonathan Peugeot. And he's a host of the up-and-coming Rude Screen podcast, The Story of Early English Christianity. He's also at the forefront, the editor-leader of the Finding the Golden Key project.
Yeah.
And Gareth is a returning guest, and he's a contributor and editor of the Symbolic World blog. He's written 2 articles on the Golden Key. So, gentlemen, it's really good to have you. There's a lot to dig into Queen of the Night. All 5 episodes have been released of the first season, I guess it's safe to say, because the finale ends with a question mark on the end. And there's just so much to go over. I've posted a few analysis videos. I'll do a few more and maybe write up an essay. But there's just so much. So I'm so grateful that when I reached out to you guys, you agreed and came on to just take a deeper look at this story.
Yeah. Let's do it.
So as far as a summary, I'm just going to point you listeners to the episode playlist. The link will be in the description and probably the comment section as well. I just encourage you to just watch them all if you haven't already. The Queen of the Night, it's fantastic. It's by Dirt Poor Robins. If you haven't watched it, we're going to be getting into some spoilers, so you might as well just push pause and go watch it. If you're not interested, we're still going to be covering some really interesting things that you can draw from as well.
I mean, the Queen of the Night is the kind of thing where, like, even if I didn't know the people involved in the process, and I've had a few conversations kind of offline with Neil and Kate, even if I didn't know the people involved in the process, and even if it wasn't kind of part of our little corner of the web or whatever you want to call it, like it's just so great. It's hugely entertaining. It's got lots of kind of implied lore. And if you grew up reading, a lot of weird stuff like I did, lots of Dunsany and Lovecraft and all those guys, then as well as like H.G. Wells and things like that, then you're going to really love Queen of the Night. So definitely just go back and like watch the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's got this steampunky fantasy musical vibe.
Yeah.
As with most things that Neil and Dirt Poor Robin seems to do, it is genre bending.
Yeah, like what an insane combination of factors that makes up just a wonderful, very cohesive story. So
yeah, and the coolest thing is that it's a modern sci-fi silent film. And so it's like we're going to be talking about all these symbols, but at the same time, there's so much to draw from the music, because let's keep in mind, Dirt Poor Robins is first and foremost, it's a band. It's a husband and wife duo who writes music and publishes it on their website and YouTube and wherever music can be streamed. The first episode starts out with a young boy who sees a moonchild walking, and he uses his spectacles and he can see into this mysterious realm of the night, and he sees this young girl and he follows her, and then eventually she finds out that he has suffered the death of his mother. It's a very tragic season in this young boy's life. So she decides to give him a Capricorn scale, and it's glowing and it's amazing. And then she says, oh no, I'm about to unveil, and she gets subsumed to the moon. And the young boy is told not to put on his spectacles, but then he decides to go ahead and do that. And then again, he sees he peers more deeply into her realm, can see her being subsumed into the moon. And then that ends. So throughout the other episodes, you see symbols of Capricorns. It's the sea goat, the head of the goat with the tail of a fish. And you see it in each of the episodes, and it plays a really important part. So my question to you guys is, what did you feel like the significance of the Capricorn as a symbol, how it carried in the story, but then also specifically the scale, the Capricorn scale?
Yeah. Well, I'll take a quick stab if that's all right.
Yeah,
and then
go ahead.
Gareth, you can fill in what I miss. So the Capricorn, obviously it's an astrological sign. The first day of Capricorn in the solar zodiac is December the 22nd, which is also the day that the rocket launches on. And Derek, I think you kind of mentioned that in one of your previous videos. But it's a very ancient, despite the fact that it's kind of a faint constellation. And I used to do and still do a lot of stargazing. And Capricorn is one of the harder constellations to make out with the naked eye. But despite that, it is one of the oldest ones associated. You could say like one of the oldest named constellations in terms of Western or Near Eastern civilization. So in Semitic mythologies, so like in Sumerian lore, the sea goat, or Capricorn as it's called in Greek, is associated with the Mesopotamian deity Enki, or sometimes Ea or Ea. And Enki is basically the god of craft and lore and wisdom and language. And he's very closely associated. There's a two-part Sumerian epic that basically gives the Sumerian version of the Tower of Babel myth, the confusion of the tongues, which is a story that exists other places than the Bible. Like all the ancient Near Eastern cultures have their retelling of that, just like they have their retelling of the flood. So I'm just mentioning this because the juxtaposition, I think, here between the Capricorn and then the Tower in Queen of the Night, right? You talked already about the Tower, the possible connections between the Tower and the Tower of Babel. And one way to understand all human scientific progress is that it is an attempt to undo the curse of Babel, right? To get back to the original goal, which is unite everybody, and then let's sort of take heaven by storm, you could say. So in this context, Enki or Ea is also he's one of the Anunnaki, which are analogous to the Watchers in, for instance, Jewish mythology, right? This idea of these angelic beings or these divine beings who give technology to mankind. So this is Enki's role. And the important thing to understand about this is that the technology that is given is not necessarily bad on its own, but it is something humanity is not quite ready for, right? And so it's something that humanity uses to ascend too soon. And I remember, I don't know if I can, well, I'll say this. Neil can get on to me if I shouldn't say this, but I remember when I was chatting with Neil about this, and he sort of mentioned that, one of the inspirations for this particular fairy tale, you could say, the Queen of the Night was the Icarus story. But of course, it's different from Icarus in all kinds of interesting ways. First of all, the main character is not flying too close to the sun. He's flying too close to the moon, which that by itself is a complete change to the story. But also there's a kind of a merger between the father and the son, although there is an important father figure in the story who comes up in this final episode. In the Icarus story, it's Daedalus who makes the wings. He's the artificer, he's the craftsman. And then Icarus uses that technology to ascend unwisely, to basically, every Greek story pretty much involves somebody dying from an act of hubris, which is a basic failure of the Delphic maxim to know yourself. And so I think you like all these things kind of come together for me in kind of a big jumble when I think about the Capricorn scale. You could say the Capricorn scale is like a divine seed. It's a star. It's one way of thinking about it. If a Capricorn is a constellation, if Capricorn is a constellation, it's sort of made up of stars. Then there's so a scale from off the Capricorn. It's like here's a little star, here's a little piece of logos, here's a little seed of something divine, and then the main character basically uses that to ascend, which is not a wrong response, but the problem is more like the method which he uses to ascend. So I mean, you can even look at how what does he trade the Capricorn scale for? He trades it for power. Right. I mean, literally for power. Like if you wanted to like really bring the money is power, power is money metaphor out like really strongly, literally it's I need electricity, I need power. So to get power, I'm going to trade this basically I'm going to trade this piece of the divine to get the power that I need so that I can do the things I want, so that I can ascend into heaven. And of course there's that I guess the last thing I'll point out here, I was thinking about this earlier. There's this Proverbs chapter 30, which is one of the Proverbs not written by Solomon, but is collected in that collection. Kind of the whole point of Proverbs 30 is to know your place, right? And so in Proverbs 30, verse 4, the writer of the proverb says, who has ascended into heaven? So this ends up being like a really famous biblical theme that's then repeated other places in the scriptures. Who has ascended into heaven or descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Who has bound the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name? And what is his son's name, if you know? Mm-hmm. Right. So this is a question. Of course, the rhetorical answer to this is God. Only God has actually done those things. So what is his name? What's the name of God? What's his son's name, if you know? Mm-hmm. And so what St. Paul does with this in Romans chapter 10, is he says, do not say in your heart. And so he says the righteousness of faith. So you could consider that the proper assent to virtue. The righteousness of faith or faithfulness speaks in this way. Do not say in your heart, who will ascend to heaven? So he's kind of quoting this Old Testament theme. And then he says that is to bring Christ down from above. Or who will descend into the abyss? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith which we preach. Mm-hmm. And so there's this idea that there's a instead of trying to ascend on your own, which is another way of saying I want to bring God down to me, right? Which I mean, what's the main character want to do? Well, he wants to ascend into the heavens so that he can win the hand of this woman, right? Which is to possess her, to bring her down with him, to own her, right? So this is his whole conversation with his father. I'm gonna have a wife. I'm gonna bring you an heir, but I have to go get her first, right? So it's this idea of I want to ascend to bring the divine back down, and there's a proper way to do that, which is through the word, like the logos of faith, right? That again, that seed that's divine. But there's also an improper way to do it, which is to try to do it technocratically or mechanistically. So, yeah,
that's good. Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. And it's just funny that you mentioned Proverbs 30. We were reading a proverb each day, and so Proverbs 30 we read yesterday, and I was like, man, this seems like so pertinent to what's going on.
Yeah.
So then, and you also mentioned St. Paul. It's like, it's interesting that it's a scale, like out of all the pieces of the sea goat, this Capricorn, like why the scale? And I just wonder if it has to do with like how in Acts it says St. Paul, like the scales fall from his eyes.
Well, and the character himself is blind.
Yes. Without his glasses.
And so,
his
technology. This is one of the things that in the story, I kind of go back on and forth. There are a lot of like wonderful symbolic touches, and a lot of the stuff is just, I think Neil being an extremely intuitive artist, where I can't, I don't think he sat down and mapped out glasses equals, whatever, but it's definitely doing something. And there's several very important parts in the story where he has this affliction this, which is his loss of vision, his inability to like totally see the divine thing. And then there's the scale, but also like we have to remember that this is also St. Paul's thorn in the flesh, right? Why was St. Paul given the thorn in the flesh? In the Orthodox Church, we celebrated the feast of Saints Peter and Paul earlier this week, and the epistle reading for that day is this long passage from 1 Corinthians where St. Paul is talking about why he was given the thorn in the flesh. The reason he was given the thorn in the flesh is because he was allowed to ascend into the third heaven and to see mysteries of which it is not good to speak. And so in order to prevent him from becoming too proud, too vain, or too puffed up, God sends him this thorn in the flesh. And historically, or you could say traditionally, the thorn in the flesh, which is not actually, it's not explained in the scriptures, but traditionally it's his eyesight, that he suffered from some kind of really debilitating eye condition, right? And so I think that's another potential kind of a St. Paul link. When the girl tells him, okay, you can watch, but not with your glasses on, right? Well, why? Because if he watches with his glasses on, what's going to happen? He's going to fall in love. And then all of this stuff is going to happen. And it's not wrong to love the divine, but also there's a certain measure, a fitness of time and place in which to do that.
There's a difference between boldness and brazenness in a way.
Yes.
So he's bold in that he insists on staying. He is brazen when he breaks the rules, right? When he places those glasses over his eyes. We were talking the other day, what is the point at which Oliver falls? When does he go astray? And I think it's at that point. And maybe there's lots of opportunities for him to correct his course along the way, but this is the beginning of this downward cascade that is this tragedy. Because there's a sense in which the Oliver at the very end is the Oliver at the beginning, right? But the Oliver in the middle is bent, right? Is twisted. There's obviously the improper ascent is in full force throughout this whole tale, and we see this throughout the myths. We see this with Actaeon. We see this with even with Adam and Eve, right? When they reach for that which is going to make them like God. Right. So this is an improper ascent as well. But as with all the improper ascents, when you brazenly barge into the throne room of God, you're cast down. And when you are cast down, you're cast down into this confused category. It's usually lower than you were before you began the ascent. Right. The sea goat is a combination of two things. It's a confused mixture, like the werewolf, like the centaur. It's not fully one or fully the other. It's not I think I'd written about this in my article, The Horse and the Rider, on the Symbolic World, but there's a difference between the centaur and the horse and the rider in that the horse is brought up to a higher level than it would otherwise be in the wild when it participates in the manifestation of the will of the rider, and both are able to act at a higher level and accomplish more than they would be able to otherwise. But the centaur is different. The centaur is the beastification of man. It's the lowering of man into the body of a horse. Actaeon is cast out when he sees Aphrodite bathing, right? And he becomes like one of the stags, and his own dogs don't recognize him. It's this same thing with the fall of man in Genesis. Being cast out and cast down into something that is more bestial. Neil's lyrics in Enchanté, which is in one of the episodes, but it's he really kind of gets at this, I believe. So I'm trying to find it here.
Enchanté was in the descent.
Correct. Yeah. Well, you see it. Yeah, you see that fun play on words there. From chagrin, I've been released. Paint me in a portrait sans the fig leaves. And I will not be concerned or ignore the things I yearn. My hunger is the rule I cannot overturn. Alas, the virtues through their glasses hid themselves from our madness. All we have within is our animal skins. that use of the technology to do that, to perform that improper ascent. Like there's a way in which Queen of the Night is a story about a particular man. There's a way in which it's a story about mankind as well. Like Oliver is all of us in a way, I think.
Well, it's like a story set in the 20s, but it's reflective. It's helping us understand where we're at today and how to live.
Yeah, and I actually in the beginning of that song Enchanté, that it's right there in those lyrics as well. When I was a little lass, the angels left from panes of glass, so unafraid. And the archers knelt to pray while the gargoyles kept away any demon that would scheme to steal my childlike faith. And that idea of the angels were like butterflies to these men, and we see this with the age of industrialization. Everything is being quantified and mass produced, and man is changing, like mankind is changing post enlightenment. Like it's sort of philosophically in the air with the Enlightenment, but it comes to a concretization in the industrial age and bears its fruit throughout the 20th and early 21st century. We see that quite clearly, I think, when the angels are pinned like butterflies to be studied.
Right.
I mean, I think that one of the interesting things that kind of comes up about as a result of this, at least in my mind, is right. So we're doing this project, Finding the Golden Key, which is a book of essays basically about what I'm calling the sacramental imagination. Some people call it re-enchantment. And I have seen some people react against that term re-enchantment. In fact, somebody, one of the contributors to the book, sat me down the other day and explained to me why she didn't like that particular term. And one of the objections to the term re-enchantment is the fact that enchantment is, of course, a two-way street. But to me, this is one of the main points of the book that we're doing. One of the things I want to point out is that, I mean, you see this in Finding the Golden Key. Not everything in fairy is like it's going to take good care of you. My favorite George MacDonald book, Fantastes, is another good example of that. Lots of good examples of you can say like the peril of enchantment, the peril of fairy. But there are different kinds of enchantment. You could say there's like the old songs, the old ways. And some of those are good and some of those are bad. The enchantment of church bells, you could say, is a happy spell or a happy enchantment, a good spell, a gospel, a good news, right? Whereas there are other darker avenues that also kind of belong to that older world. On the other hand, and this is an amazing thing about that song Enchanté to me, is that the sort of technocratic / hedonistic, and it's almost weird that those two things exist alongside each other, if that makes any sense at all. But that whole world, that is its own spell. It's its own kind of form of enchantment. And you could say, in as much as it dulls our ability to really perceive real spiritual realities, it functions like you could say like a spell of sleep, right? That's kind of laying on our civilization. And a weird thing comes about as a result of this. I saw this. I was like overthinking dumb memes. So there was this meme within the last week or two that was kind of making its way around Facebook, and it was man, I can't even remember the actual joke the meme was making, but it was talking about how the purest form of sound of experiencing music was going to be when Elon Musk could put a chip in your head that would let the music go directly to your brain. And I shared this on a Discord server that I'm on, and somebody very insightfully just mentioned, well, don't you already have something for that called ears? Ears are the way that music gets to your brain. And of course, more importantly, the way that it gets to your soul. But the implication of that meme, which was, I think, still kind of mocking Elon Musk, but accepting the basic premise, which is if I had a chip in my brain so that I could pipe things directly into it rather than experiencing it through the senses which God has given me, then I would be experiencing the thing more purely, right? If I had a chip in my brain so you could directly pipe in music, so you could directly pipe in certain, visions or other sensory experiences without my gross body being involved. And of course, part of this is that we start thinking of our brains as not part of our body. That awful meme that I hate, that's like, you're actually a tiny little, brain piloting a bone mech, because your brain is actually who you are. And of course, now even scientifically we know that's not true, because things like your memory and your emotions are actually spread throughout your body, and are dependent on cultures of microorganisms that live inside of you and distributed between your other organs and the rest of your nervous system, which actually goes all over your body. So it's, there's, if you took your brain out and you put it in another person's body, you would not be the same person anymore, even if you could survive that. So anyway, all that to say, I think that all of the weird, you could say the weird combination of low sensual hedonism raising hell, right? They bring the booze up out of the cellar, right? And also the technocratic ascent, right? Those are two weird things that seem like they shouldn't have a lot to do with each other, but they always end up existing side by side, because the one is you could say that hedonism is an attempt to fill in what is missing from the embodied experience of that technocratic ascent. So as long as we have people pushing for upload your brain, we are also going to have junk food. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, right. And I want to introduce the symbol of the spider that you see in the brooch that's over several of the main characters' hearts. Is the spider is on Oliver Graves, the protagonist.
Yeah.
And I just, when you're talking about that element of sleep or being lulled into sleep, I mean, that's precisely what a spider does with prey. Doesn't it? I mean, it sets a web, it constructs something, and then somebody's like either passing through, or they, it somehow it ensnares them, and then it uses them, or it draws out the nutrition whenever the time is right for the spider. Do you guys see that happening, like in this story here?
I don't want to jump on. I just talked a bunch. Gareth, if you want to go first.
So yeah, there's something interesting with the way the image of the spider is played, because there's two aspects of it, and you see this in what the Queen of the Night says at the end, right? If a lady finds a spider out in the in the garden, she'll let him live. But if she finds him in her chamber, and so there's this difference.
That was a terrifying scene, by the way.
Yeah.
Totally amazing.
Brilliantly.
I would say it compares the Galadriel scene whenever she
Oh, I think it's much better, actually. I don't like the way they did that scene in the Jackson films. So I thought this was better.
Oh, get a tip of the hat to Queen of the Night.
Better than Peter Jackson.
Better than Peter Jackson.
Good job.
Go ahead, Gareth.
Peter Jackson jokes come to mind, but yeah. So like there's something ethereal, or it's seemingly ethereal in what the spider does, in what he constructs. He doesn't build a dam like a beaver out of wood, right? It's this magical, translucent thing that catches the light. It's got all this geometrical pattern that's in it, right? Which is something you don't tend to assume.
And of course, there's that amazing aerial view of the
whole city,
of the town, that everything is laid out in that spider web of electrical lighting. And when I saw that again, just watching through it to prepare for this chat, I thought about two things. One was, and this ties into what you're saying, Gareth. The first thing I thought of was is the web of technology, right? But then also, if you kind of take the thing that the Queen of the Night said, you realize that that's also showing the insignificance of the entire project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like from above, everything that Oliver is doing is just like, it's like a little bug. It's a spider web.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
to that, I guess. So in Ecclesiastes, I think it's 12.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a reference to a silver thread, right? Which is whenever the Queen of the Night starts talking about the spider. I thought of this passage. Remember your creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light of the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men stoop, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows grow dim. When the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when men rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. When men are afraid of heights and dangers in the street, and the almond tree blossoms, and the grasshopper drags himself along, and no desire is stirred, then man goes to his eternal home, and mourners go about in the streets. Remember him before the silver cord is severed, or the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring, or the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless.
Nothing like Ecclesiastes to just put you in a mood.
Oh, it doesn't it though? But like, even as I'm reading this, because I read this like 3 times since watching Queen of the Night, because it just made me think of it. So like, you've connected to the spider, that idea of the silver cord being severed, right? And that's what happens, isn't it? Like sometimes you'll see a spider just dangling in midair, and he looks like he's flying, and you'll wave around trying to find the thing to knock him down. And sometimes it's difficult, but eventually it breaks and he falls, and it wasn't magic after all. There's like that idea of meaningless, like everything is vanity. Like you said, Richard, it was so insignificant. All the wiles and operations of Oliver were just nothing compared to what he encountered when he reached when he finally got to what he thought he was seeking. His mind wasn't ready for it.
You could do plot summary of Queen of the Night is the itsy bitsy spider climbed up the water spout, down came the rain, and washed the spider out. Stop. No, the sun has not yet come up. We'll see if it does.
And actually, Richard, I if you could just pause there, I want to interject that. So totally agree with the itsy bitsy spider. It's amazing how you could just reduce it down to this, the song I sing to my 4-year-old daughter.
I mean, that song though it's like the shape of reality. Like nursery rhymes are very potent.
Yeah. Especially that the ascension, the flood, or the descension due to water, and then the sun coming up, and you're right, it's completely profound. And to Neil's credit, that's totally the plot structure of these 5 episodes. But what I noticed at the end is that amongst the people, so he leaves the city in this rocket ship, and the wake of his ship just destroys everything he built, including his friends and his family. And amongst those people that are taking their revenge, I didn't see Freya.
I noticed the same thing.
Okay.
So maybe this is a good time to talk about her.
Yeah, let's introduce Freya, because I think it might be, especially how they ended it was like the end question mark. And it's like, maybe there's a season 2 where it's like the second half of the itsy bitsy spider.
Yeah.
So
go ahead. So Freya in Old Norse means the lady, like the lady, the mistress, right? So she's an Old Norse goddess that basically you could say roughly the equivalent of like Venus or Isis, which is how when people from the Roman world or the Egyptian world, when they came in contact, that's how they kind of understood her. But a goddess of love and fertility. She's married, but her husband is always sort of like perpetually distant from her. Like he's lost and she's always searching for him. She's always weeping. She weeps like red gold. And she is kind of importantly for understanding of Old Norse mythology. There are basically 2 pantheons. that probably represented, the gods or the principalities of two different tribal groups. And so the older ones, who are basically all associated with peace and fertility, are called the Vanir. And then the newer ones, the Aesir, are all gods of war and war, basically war, and poetry and other things too. But like, Odin, for instance, is the leader of the Aesir, and he's the god of like war and madness and poetry. And if you don't know what those things have to do with each other, then you don't know Old Norse. And then, but Freya belongs to that older group, right? That older group, and so there's something very kind of sad about her. But she is the lady. She is the mistress, and she had a very important feminine role in Scandinavian society, basically until it Christianized. At which point that role was taken by the Blessed Virgin Mary. Who very typically in English we call Our Lady, right? Not just the lady, but Our Lady, which I think is a small but important distinction. But so the character of Freya, she's got these wings on her dress, and I think that, I remember saying over on Neil's Discord, I remember saying after we watched the premiere, a lot of us watched the premiere of the 4th episode together. I remember saying, okay, I need to see what kind of lady the Queen of the Night is, so I can understand what Freya's role in the story is, because it very clearly seemed to be setting up two questions, right? Two opposing feminine choices that Oliver can make, right? One of those choices is the Queen of the Night, which again, we got trying to figure out, well, what is she? Who is she? What is she like? And then the other one is Freya, who is the you could say like the lower feminine or the earthly feminine, but also maybe
very practical.
Very practical, but also is the thing that's going to keep Oliver from ascending too soon or too quickly or too wrongly. But maybe the wings indicate that maybe she can help him to ascend, but in a proper kind of a way. And so this is like the other thing about the image of the web. You can think of it as a trap, but also webs are one of the main ways that you say you can represent relationships between things. And so Freya's a way for him to kind of leave the web of relationships that he's been caught in, which, in order to build the things that he wants to build and do the things that he wants to do, let's say that anytime you ascend up the ontological hierarchy, you end up severing relationships with what is below her. Not totally. Obviously, when the relationships aren't totally severed, then you have hierarchy. That's what hierarchy is. But you can just think about if you live in a family that's not particularly religious, and then you become very religious. One of the things that will happen will be a natural distancing between you and the people in your family. Similar things happen in families where somebody's, most people in the family maybe aren't very well educated, didn't go to college or things like that. And then one of them does that, even if they're proud of that person, the fact that that person has now had an experience that the others have not had does something to change that web of relationships. It severs them from it a little bit. A natural ascent through love in life would be, you could say, marriage, in which you move up the ontological hierarchy. You become sort of a king or a queen, but you also leave your father and mother, right? And you cleave to your new spouse. And so, but wrong ascents have this as well. Like if you ascend in the wrong ways. And so obviously Oliver, when he ascends in the rocket ship, he ends up laying waste to and destroying this whole web of relationships, some good, some bad, that he's made on the earth, which you could say is one of the things represented by that sort of web grid of electricity and illumination. Is, electric lighting is not a bad thing. You could argue that it's had some unintended consequences, but giving power to people's homes and aid and helping people in a certain way, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But so Oliver was in he was in these relationships. Some of them are a little ambiguous. Some of them are obviously negative. Some of them seem to be positive. But he loses all of those things, including his relationship with his father, as he ascends. And of course, because he ascends in a wrong way, the breaking of that web is extremely destructive. So anyway, there's a little rambling, but
something I found interesting about Freya is, so her full name is Freya Faire. Faire spelled Faire, like the old spelling of fairy, suggesting that, so she's obviously set up as this, the route Oliver could have chosen, right? And it's certainly implied that that would have been a better and less destructive and less tragic tale. But if that's the route he ought to have chosen, that last name of Faire suggests to me that there's still something magical in the proper ascent, right? Magic is often pitted against technology, right? In the modern age,
right,
magic is old-fashioned. The realm of fairy has faded with the fairy tale and with the dream.
Yeah.
This is in many ways that recovering that sacramental imagination, that enchanted worldview is part of what your project is about, Richard, because there is a problem there, and I think Neil and Kate are really highlighting this problem in Queen of the Night. And there's that, I don't know, I found that really, really interesting, that spelling of her last name. There's something magical in the way he was supposed to ascend. There's something.
The sacramental imagination is specifically about this idea. It's about recovering a way of seeing, but the way of seeing is a way of looking at the created order, right? In a way that understands that it is capable of becoming a mediator of the divine. Right? And so when you don't believe that, then you fall both into gross materialism, which is just things are just things now. They don't refer to anything else, right? Animals are just animals, and therefore I can use them for what I want to use them for, right? They don't have any meaning beyond just what they are, beyond their calorie count or their protein or their, the land doesn't have any usefulness to me beyond the resources that I can harvest from it, etc. And then it also leads to a kind of Gnosticism, which says, okay, well, if the material world can't bring me closer to the divine, then I have to find some other mechanistic way to ascend. And I mean, we can talk about, I sort of joke, it's not really a joke. At least once a week, I get a question from a stranger on the internet about psychedelics. If you want to understand why psychedelics would be a terrible idea, Queen of the Night is a great film to watch.
Yeah. On that note, it's like,
yeah.
In the final episode, we finally meet the Queen, and of course, it's Kate DeGrade, right? And it's like the first part of the interaction is not so bad. She's conversive. In some ways, she's merciful in the way she's approaching him. And then the sun goes down.
Well, okay, but the sun doesn't just go down. I was thinking about this. That's a lunar eclipse. Because the only time that the moon can't see the sun is during a lunar eclipse. Now, on Earth, the moon is on the other side of the planet. We can't see the moon. But for the moon to not be able to see the sun means it's a lunar eclipse. Anyway.
No, go right ahead. It's just, what does it look like to have the divine feminine in complete darkness without the sun, without it hosting or taking in the sun? And I think that's what Queen of the Night gives us, and it does a pretty darn good job.
Yeah,
and there's a sense in which Oliver, because his rocket destroys, for all intents and purposes, the whole world, right? Maybe he doesn't destroy
the world of the story, for sure.
All the world of the story, right?
It's definitely
apocalyptic. So the earth that obstructs the sun, the light of her love, like that. This is Oliver. It is Oliver who obstructs the light, because he is the earth. He is the world. He is the race of men at this point. Partially maybe why she's so angry. Because what is the moon without the sun? Just a dark
But also
and
like
barren rock.
Oliver is like a failed son, right?
Mm.
You know, he's trying to bring light to things. He wants to be the mate of the moon, which is the sun. And
Yeah.
I mean, we can probably don't have time to talk about the fact that in almost all mythology,
He's Baal over trying to.
the moon is feminine, except when it's not. But in most world mythologies, you could say like over time, a sort of general consensus arose in the classical world that the moon was feminine. And of course, it's tied to cycles, menstrual cycles. In lots and lots of languages, the words for month, moon, and menstrual are all related, like they are in English or Latin. And so there is a sort of, part of what's going on there is a, man, I don't know how weird I'm allowed to sound on Derek's channel.
It's okay. We're almost like an hour in, so you can get here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if people haven't left by now, it's their own fault. Right. So there is a connection between the lunar eclipse and when a woman gets her period. Right? Because it's a cutting off from the masculine, right? And so in most traditional cultures, there are taboos about marital relations during a woman's period. For instance, in the Old Testament, when a lunar eclipse happens, which they happen with obviously not monthly, but they happen with certain regularity, which is predictable. When a lunar eclipse happens, it's the total sort of cutoff of the masculine and the feminine, and for a while those two things are cut off from each other, and so there's something in a very deep symbolic way. There's something like that going on in this final episode where we see two things happening. One is that the moon is cut off from her proper mate, from her proper lover, right, as she says, which is the sun, which is the masculine sphere. But at the same time, she's improperly approached by another suitor, right? And so which is sort of the violation of a taboo. It's the entry into a sacred place, into a holy place, both wrong time and wrong person, right? And when that happens, that is when you could say all hell breaks loose. And there's this wonderful sort of like things go very Lovecraftian very quickly. There is a tentacle, and really, really wonderful sequence. And it culminates in this Luciferian fall. And that's all I could think about watching his rocket ship come down like a burning star. All I could think about was, in the book of Revelation, the star falling from heaven and landing in the sea and poisoning the waters of the world. And of course, I mean, something to even think about is that the imagery of the sea in the show, which it's not super pronounced, but Capricorn is in the part of the sky that is known as the sea or the waters. The moon itself, it has deep connections to the sea, and Oliver's rocket kind of falls into the sea. It kind of lands on the shore, but it kind of falls into the sea, and this very kind of Book of Revelation moment. And
you know what? He's actually in the same place he was when he was a kid, and he fell off the cliff.
Yeah,
he's at the edge of
with
Earth and the sea.
Tides coming. Are they coming in or going out?
Yeah, I don't remember if they were coming in or going out, but I mean that's some nice symmetry for you there. And of course, and then at the same time he lands, he falls, he loses his glasses, right? And then when he puts them back on, he kind of sees this vision of his father walking away from him, and then of course the angry mob approaching, which is kind of the, hey, this is what happens when you put your glasses on when you weren't supposed to. Like everything kind of comes back around full circle. One thing I would like to ask and hear your guys' take on this, I don't know, I've been noodling on this, is like, what is the deal with photography in this movie? Because like every time he sees the flashes of the cameras, he sees the girl, like the Queen of the Night as the young girl. We didn't even talk about the sort of stair-stepped ages, but which are is new moon, half moon, etc. But also when the Queen of the Night is revealing herself to him, he sees the camera flashes again. And I found that to be a little odd, and not in a way that I felt like it was wrong or out of place or something, but I don't think I fully understand what is going on.
Cameras and moments that have cosmic significance. So when I was baptized, there were lots of people who volunteered to take pictures and video the whole thing, and I didn't want that. They did it anyway, and I'm very thankful that they did. They sent these to me, and they're lovely photographs and video. But I feel like there's something that photography as a technology does to these eternal moments, at least in a way. It seems to rob them of their eternality. And so there's a way in which I think photography is used in Queen of the Night, where it's sort of connected to the descent in a way. The ascent that's really a descent in the grand scheme of things, because it's an improper ascent, which must inevitably end in a tragic falling. But there's, I don't know, I that's what I was thinking of it. That's rather ill-formed and rambly, but I was just thinking about that photography, to me, especially when you're encountering really special moments that involve liturgy or something like that, if you're Orthodox, I don't like cameras present. It's as though technology is trying to rob something from the moment in a way by taking it and making it forever in a photo or in a video. It's not really forever. It is a false forever.
It's an artificial capturing.
Yeah, it's an artificial. It's an attempt to account for the moment, right? It fails. We all know that seeing a picture of a sunrise is not like seeing a sunrise, but we take the pictures anyway, don't we?
Yeah, it's interesting that it's in those moments, though, whenever like the flash is going off, that it's the glimpses, it's often the distorted images of the moon children that appear, or like when the technology is that's keeping his father alive in episode the last two episodes. It's like they start short-circuiting, and it's like when things start falling apart, the moon children seem to appear.
Yeah, and it's always at points where he seems to realize, whether it's conscious or unconscious, that something isn't right. Something isn't right. You think of like a wedding or something really special, and maybe a wedding isn't a great example because there's lots of photography at weddings now, but like the really powerful moment is happening, and suddenly somebody didn't turn the flash on their phone off, and it just like it rips everything out for a brief moment.
It's just
realize that something isn't right.
It's just weird to me that I have the same feeling about cameras, but it is weird to me that that flash would also like take him back to that moment where like he's like seeing her face in it. And I don't know if this is related to something more like, we see like a light bulb as being like it's like shorthand, a hieroglyphic for a flash of insight. But also like it seems to be not so much that as almost like something haunting him, like almost like it's almost as though it's triggering kind of a PTSD-esque response that's like bringing him back to is like, oh, this, I can't enjoy anything in this life. I can't enjoy the material world, not in a debauched form, but also not like in a wholesome way. I can't enjoy any of this because I've had this vision that I have to pursue. But then it's just sort of weird when it gets flipped at the end, and that's what I didn't totally understand. So I don't know. I'm gonna have to mull on this a little bit more. Maybe after a week or two of thinking about this and watching it again, it'll be clearer to me. But there are a lot of things in this that I think like symbolically, I don't totally understand what they're doing yet. I feel like they mean something, but I don't always know what, which is true about any good fairy tale, I think. Any good fairy tale or really, strange, bit of folklore or something like that, it's always going to have some things where you're like, man, this feels significant, but I don't understand what it means.
So in I guess the last thing I would say about that, in the beginning of the first episode, not in the beginning, but during that first episode, we've got the song "The Gambit of Night," and the first few two verses are: "The moon gleams dimly, whispers thinly, a crescent smile, the sirens while ordained or wild, the gambit of night." In the second verse, "The sun looms larger, a scolding father, his scornful light a sparkling blight, a scalding blithe, oh, where is the night?" And throughout the film, you see every now and then the sun will be on the horizon and Oliver will kind of shield his eyes from it. And maybe it's connected to the flash of the camera is connected to that. Like in a way, it reminds him of it's the scolding light of the sun.
It's definitely connected to his own father in some way, I think. He rejects his own role as a father, right? The thing he should do is marry Freya and give his father an heir, right? That's the thing he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And he sort of rejects that. It doesn't seem like the father in this particular story is particularly scolding, but there does seem to be an indication that he's sort of forgotten about his role as a son, and so he goes back to and sorry, I said it was he goes back to his father. He's been becoming wealthy and successful in all these things, and he's been distanced from his father, and he goes back to him, right at his very last moments, and he hasn't been able to do the thing his father really wanted, which is to give him a grandson. And his father dies, and the death of his father in the story roughly corresponds with this eclipse, right? Where the earth is moved, the lunar eclipse, right? Which from the, I don't know, from the perspective of the moon, is a lunar eclipse a solar eclipse, I guess, where the earth is moved between the sun and the moon. But yeah, it is. So there's something there. Yeah, I think there's definitely something there. Some connection between the sun and fatherhood, and of course, right at the very end of the story, he, almost the last thing that he sees is his father picking up that little boy that fell. Right, which if you think about it, if he lands in the same place that he would have fallen off the cliff, something to think about is just the fact that, like, there's a different version of that story where he's not out without his father, and his father picks him up and carries him back home, and none of this happened. Which is, something to think about.
Richard, I have to agree. I mean, episode 5, the finale, it just came out like a few days ago. So a lot of these are just like knee-jerk reactions, and it's like, oh man, I'm like the connections are just starting to spark.
Yeah, for sure. Stories like this don't come along super often, not nearly as often as I'd like them to. And I'm a writer, so I do write stories and I enjoy reading stories, but it's very rare to see somebody do something like this through the medium of film and kind of all the things that, I mean, it's a great example of some great uses of we have all this technology that's available to us now. The way that they made it, the way that they distributed it, all these different things is pretty cool, and pretty cool uses of technology. And I'm just very excited to see what they do next. And I'm excited to like sit on it for a couple of weeks and then go back and rewatch Queen of the Night and see what I think about the finale then.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about the one queen who maybe like represents the oldest stage of the moon, like the full moon or something. We even talk about her being sort of like frozen in place.
Yeah.
And then kind of
at first, yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
There's actually several things that this
there's a bunch of details.
Is unfolding. I'm just thinking about like
if we're just gonna make a list, right, of things that we didn't talk about, right? The line in that one song about rising above the cherubim, right? And then of course he gets to the palace of the moon, and the gate is guarded by cherubs, like Mesopotamian Babylonian cherubs. And then the Kom Yesu Kom, which is a funerary hymn, right? It's like it's either part of a funeral mass or just another funerary hymn, but it's a funerary hymn that's what's playing as he is falling, during his Luciferian fall, which I thought was really interesting. And then
what the alcohol, what's going on with the alcohol and the spirits. At first it's champagne, and then it switches to something like hard liquor, and
and the light sort of the sort of light coming, it's like a light pulled up from the earth. So that's something else to talk about.
There's the sub arc of Prue and Lucretius. Is it Lucretius or Lucreus?
Oh, of course. I didn't even get into Prue or Lucretius.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about them.
I mean, there's a whole thing going on there.
They were pretty hilarious. They definitely were leaning into like the old timey silent film. One tall, one short, one black, one white. Just like total opposites.
Yeah. Well, they when standing next to one
kind
another, they're like a yin yang symbol.
Yeah, and kind of representing, you could say, like extroverted halves of Oliver's nature, which is actually what most of the characters are. Most of the other characters, I would say, other than Freya, represent different aspects of Oliver's nature. Or could, I'm not saying it's the only thing they do, but certainly could represent.
And also I'm really curious about the tie of Capricorn with the history of Caesar Augustus, and like how significant that was as far as tying to like the sun and the issuance of the golden age of Roman history. So like, and how that was tied to the Capricorn. Actually, there's some controversy there, but so I think the list is even growing as we're talking about.
Yeah.
So
list for future conversation, or for your viewers to chime in on Discord and elsewhere and give us their thoughts.
Yeah. Hit up the comment section for sure. Curious what you're thinking. And then check out the other podcast. This is just one of many conversations that Richard is part of. As we mentioned in the intro, Universal History. I know you just had a really good one that came out. I'm halfway through with Gog and Magog.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And then Gareth, your exploration of ascension, proper and improper, is great through your writings, as well as some of the conversations we've had.
Oh yeah.
Gosh, one of the things that I'm realizing just in recalling Gareth's conversation that we had was, how do you make a proper ascension? It's actually, you properly lay down and you properly sacrifice, which is another thing I suppose we get into, is the topic of sacrifice.
That's a big theme in this whole thing. Oliver says to the Queen, "I've sacrificed everything."
Yes.
He says, "Yes."
Have you? Yeah.
But isn't it interesting that the things that Oliver sacrificed were mostly other people's stuff?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. This has been super enjoyable. I need to clock back into work.
No, yeah. Right, you're still at work, Derek.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you all thank you both for a really cool conversation. Let's do this again. This was a lot of fun.
Great fun.
All right. Well, I'm on board. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your guys' time. Until next time.
You gentlemen have a good one.